Sometimes the truth is stranger than any fiction we could write. And sometimes, when the cameras are off and the champagne has stopped flowing, the real story finally comes to light. What happens when a woman who's lived 1,000 lives finally decides to speak her truth? What happens when love, loss, and secrets collide in the most unexpected way? This is the story of Julia Lemigova. A story that begins in a world most of us will never know, travels through tragedy that would break anyone, and arrives at a confession that nobody saw coming. Pause for a moment. Imagine standing at a crossroads where your past meets your present, where the person you love deserves honesty, but the truth itself sounds impossible. That's where Julia found herself. And what she revealed would send shockwaves through the media, raise eyebrows across the world, and force us all to ask, what really happened? Let's go back, way back, before Julia Lemigova became known as the wife of tennis legend Martina Navratilova. She was a girl from Russia with dreams bigger than the cold Moscow winters. Born in 1972, Julia grew up in the Soviet Union, a place where beauty could be your ticket out, where being noticed meant opportunity, and where ambition burned bright despite the gray skies. She was stunning, not just pretty, stunning in a way that stops traffic. And she knew it. By the time she was in her early 20s, Julia had already begun to taste what fame felt like. In 1990, something extraordinary happened. She became the second runner-up at Miss USSR. Think about that for a second. In a country of millions, she stood on that stage. Sash across her chest, cameras flashing, and the world suddenly knew her name. But Julia wasn't satisfied with second place. She wanted more. She always wanted more. The Soviet Union was changing. The Iron Curtain was falling. And for someone like Julia, someone with beauty, charm, and unstoppable drive, the world was opening up in ways her parents' generation could never have imagined. She moved. She traveled. She reinvented herself again and again. And then, she met someone who would change everything. His name was Édouard Stern. If you don't know that name, let me paint you a picture. Édouard was a French banker. But not just any banker. He was one of the wealthiest, most powerful men in Europe. Billions, influence, connections that reached into the highest levels of government and business. He was brilliant, ruthless, and complicated, in ways that only the ultra-rich can. Julia and Édouard's relationship was intense, passionate, tumultuous. The kind of relationship that burns hot and leaves scars. And from that relationship, Julia became pregnant. In 2000, she gave birth to a son, Maximilian, a beautiful baby boy, who should have been the beginning of a new chapter filled with joy. But life had other plans. Just weeks after, Maximilian was born. Tragedy struck in the cruelest way imaginable. The baby died. Sudden infant death syndrome, they said. SIDS. One day your child is alive, breathing, perfect. And the next, they're gone, and no one can tell you why. Imagine that pain. Imagine holding your newborn baby, feeling the weight of new motherhood, the exhaustion, the love that overtakes everything else. And then imagine that child being ripped away from you without warning, without reason, without mercy. Julia was shattered, completely broken, and her relationship with Édouard didn't survive it. How could it? Grief has a way of either binding people together or tearing them apart. For them, it was the latter. They separated. Julia was left to pick up the pieces of a life that had fallen apart. But here's where the story gets even darker, even more twisted. In 2005, Édouard Stern was murdered. Shot 4 times while dressed in a latex bodysuit in a Geneva apartment. The woman who killed him, Cecile Brassard, claimed self-defense. She claimed abuse. She claimed she had no choice. The trial became a media circus. Every detail of Édouard's life, his relationships, his secrets, was splashed across headlines. And Julia's name kept coming up, not as a suspect, but as a ghost from his past. A woman who had loved him, lost a child with him, and walked away from a world of wealth most people only dream about. By then, Julia had already moved on. At least, she was trying to. She had reinvented herself yet again. This time, as a businesswoman. She threw herself into work, launching a skincare and beauty company. She was determined to build something of her own, something that didn't depend on anyone else's money or anyone else's name. And slowly, painfully, she began to heal. But the past has a way of finding you, especially when you're someone like Julia. Someone whose life has been lived in the spotlight, whose story is too dramatic to stay buried. Years passed. Julia kept building her life, kept moving forward. She stayed out of the tabloids for the most part, focused on her business, on finding some kind of peace. And then she met Martina. Martina Navratilova needs no introduction. One of the greatest tennis players of all time. 18 Grand Slam singles titles. 31 Grand Slam doubles titles. A fighter on and off the court. An activist. A legend. When Julia and Martina met in 2006, something clicked. Despite their different worlds, despite their different backgrounds, they found each other. And what started as a connection grew into something deeper. Something real. They were together for years before they made it official. In 2014, Martina proposed to Julia. Not in private. Not in some quiet romantic moment. But in front of thousands of people at the US Open, on the Jumbotron. With the whole world watching, Julia said yes, and in December 2014, they married. It was a beautiful ceremony, filled with love, laughter, and hope. Two women who had both been through so much, who had both lived full, complicated lives before finding each other, were finally building something together. They seemed perfect. They seemed happy. But as we've learned, nothing in Julia's life is ever quite that simple. Fast forward to 2024. Julia and Estelle are still together. Still married, still navigating life as a high-profile couple. They've dealt with Martina's health scares. They've raised Julia's daughters from previous relationships. They've built a life. And then, out of nowhere, an old story resurfaces. Rumors begin to swirl. Whispers, questions, something about Julia's past. Something about a relationship no one knew about. Something involving a mortician in Haiti. Wait, what? Yes, you heard that right. A mortician. In Haiti, the internet exploded. The tabloids went wild. Everyone wanted answers. What was this story? Was it true? How did this even happen? And then Julia herself stepped forward. She didn't hide. She didn't dodge. She didn't let the rumors control the narrative. Instead, she confirmed it. Yes, she said. It happened. She had been involved with a mortician in Haiti. And yes, she slept with him. But here's the thing. Julia didn't just drop that bombshell and walk away. She offered up a timeline. A defense. An explanation. She wanted people to understand the context. The when. The why. The how. According to Julia, this relationship happened years ago. Long before she met Martina. During one of the most difficult periods of her life. She had been in Haiti. Dealing with personal matters, processing grief. Trying to find herself in the aftermath of losing her son and ending her relationship with Édouard. And in that vulnerable moment, in that broken space, she met someone. A man who worked as a mortician. Someone who understood death in a way most people don't. Someone who, perhaps, understood her pain. They connected. And yes, things became physical. But Julia was adamant. This was not an affair. This was not cheating. This happened before Martina. Before their life together. Before any promises were made, she offered the timeline to prove it. To show that while the story might sound scandalous, while it might raise eyebrows, it wasn't a betrayal. It was a chapter from her past. A complicated, messy human chapter. And Martina. She stood by her. Publicly, privately, completely. Martina made it clear that she knew about Julia's past. That she accepted it. That love means embracing someone fully, including the parts of their history that are painful or confusing or difficult to explain. But of course, the media didn't care about nuance. They cared about the headline. Martina Navratilova's wife slept with a mortician. It was too juicy to ignore. Too strange not to dissect. People had questions. So many questions. How did she even meet a mortician in Haiti? What was she doing there in the first place? Why a mortician of all people? And why was this coming out now? All these years later. Julia didn't owe anyone an explanation. But she gave one anyway. Because she understood that in the age of social media, in the age of instant judgment, silence can be more damaging than honesty. She spoke about grief. About how losing her son had sent her into a spiral. About how she had traveled searching for meaning, for healing. For anything that might fill the void inside her. Haiti, she said, was one of those places. A place where she could be anonymous. Where she could process her pain without the weight of her past pressing down on her. And the mortician. He was someone who saw death every day. Someone who understood that life is fragile, that loss is universal. That sometimes we're just looking for connection in the darkness. It wasn't a romance for the ages. It wasn't a grand love affair. It was two broken people finding comfort in each other, however briefly. And then Julia left. She moved on. She continued her journey. And eventually, she found Martina. But here's what makes this story so powerful. So human, so worth telling. Julia didn't try to hide this part of her past. When it came up, when people started asking questions, she owned it. She told the truth. She defended herself without shame. Because here's the thing about Julia Lemigova. She survived more than most of us can imagine. She's lost a child. She's loved dangerous men. She's reinvented herself over and over. She's been in the spotlight, out of the spotlight. And everywhere in between, and through it all, she's remained unapologetically herself. That takes courage. Real courage. It's easy to judge someone's choices when you're sitting comfortably in your own life. When you haven't walked through fire. When you haven't felt the kind of pain that makes you question everything. But Julia has walked through that fire. And she's still standing. Martina saw that strength. She fell in love with all of Julia. The beauty, yes. But also the scars. The complicated history. The woman who has lived 1,000 lives and isn't afraid to tell the truth about any of them. This story isn't really about a mortician in Haiti. It's about honesty. It's about vulnerability. It's about the fact that we all have chapters in our past that are messy, that don't fit neatly into a perfect narrative. Julia Lemigova's life is proof that you can survive the unthinkable, that you can lose everything and still build something beautiful. That love can find you even when you think you're too broken to be loved. And sometimes, the most scandalous-sounding headline is just the story of a human being trying to survive. So what's the takeaway here? What are we supposed to learn from all this? Maybe it's that we should think twice before judging. Maybe it's that everyone has a story we don't know. Maybe it's that real love means accepting someone's past. No matter how complicated it might be. Or maybe it's simpler than that. Maybe it's just a reminder that life is messy. People are complicated. And sometimes the truth is stranger, sadder, and more beautiful than anything we could make up. Julia Lemigova confirmed she slept with a Haitian mortician. And in doing so, she reminded us all what courage really looks like. If this story moved you, if it made you think, or if you're just fascinated by the complexity of real human lives, hit that like button and subscribe to Luminoir for more stories that go beyond the headlines. Drop a comment below and let us know what you think about Julia's journey. And stick around, because there are so many more untold stories waiting to be discovered.